Just try to imagine that. 24 years, not once seeing your own reflection. That one detail, for a man who survived Syria's infamous Tadmar prison, tells you almost everything you need to know. We're talking about a system designed not just to lock a person away, but to completely erase their sense of self. It's a heavy place to start, but it's where we need to begin.
Today, we are going deep, way beyond the headlines, to investigate the global prison system. We're going to explore some of the most severe prisons on Earth and really unpack the machinery of justice, power, and control that keeps them running.
So here's our roadmap. We've broken this down into 5 acts. First, we'll step inside the world's toughest prisons. Then, we'll look at the systems that fill them up. From there, we'll dive into the world of prison gangs. Then, we'll get personal and examine the human cost of isolation. And we'll wrap it all up with a really fundamental question about human dignity.
Okay, let's get right into it. What is it actually like to live inside one of these maximum security facilities? To start, we're going to a very remote prison in Russia, right near the border with Kazakhstan.
This number, around 700, represents the number of inmates inside Russia's Black Dolphin prison. And here's the thing. Every single person there is serving a life sentence. This place isn't meant for rehabilitation. It is designed from the ground up to be the last place on Earth for the country's most dangerous murderers, terrorists, and serial killers.
The level of control here is, well, it's absolute. The daily routine is designed to grind you down. Inmates live in a cell within a cell behind 3 separate steel doors. For about 16 hours every single day, they are not allowed to sit or even rest on their bunks. Every command from a guard must be met with, "Yes, sir." They are watched 24/7, and their only break from the cell, 90 minutes of exercise, alone, in what is basically a large cage. It's a system of total psychological and physical domination.
But you know, if Black Dolphin represents a kind of cold, rigid, absolute control, other prisons around the world show us a completely different kind of horror. Take Syria's Tadmor. Survivors don't describe it as a system, they call it a place of horror, death, and grotesque torture. So that makes you wonder, what is the real purpose of these institutions? Is it just about confinement, or is it something much, much darker?
And that question leads us directly into our second act. How do these brutal places get so full to begin with? Well, very often the answer is found in the justice systems themselves.
Let's just take one example, Malawi. On paper, the system's goal is public safety, which sounds right. But the reality is that the widespread use of fines and court fees has basically created a modern-day debtor's prison. It's simple. If you can't pay your fine, you go to jail. Audits have found that more than 2/3 of the people waiting for trial were only there because they were too poor to get out. In effect, poverty itself has become the crime.
And this kind of dynamic isn't just limited to developing nations. For decades now, since the 1990s, the United States has had one of the highest incarceration rates in the entire world. We're talking 4 to 8 times higher than other comparable countries. And this massive increase in imprisonment hasn't been felt equally. It's disproportionately impacted minority communities, concentrating the immense social costs in places that were already struggling for resources.
So this brings us to our first system check. You have to ask, when a justice system ends up punishing people for being poor, has it stopped being about justice? Has it instead become a tool for social control, a way to manage the poor rather than to actually address crime?
Now, let's shift our focus from the outside system to the world inside the prison walls, because a very different kind of power emerges there, especially when the state's control either fails or becomes corrupt. We're talking about prison gangs.
And these are not just small cliques, they operate like shadow governments. In Venezuela's La Sabaneta prison, a gang war for control left 16 people dead, with the rivals being gruesomely dismembered. In Central America, the violent street wars between gangs like MS-13 and Mara-18 don't stop when they get to prison. They actually escalate into massacres. And in South Africa, the historic number gangs run the show, enforcing a brutal and rigid code that dictates every part of an inmate's life.
And their power isn't just contained within the walls. Prison gangs run huge criminal operations from their cells. They control drug trafficking both inside the prison and out on the streets, working directly with outside cartels. The prison stops being a place of punishment and becomes a headquarters for crime.
So here's our next system check. The very existence of these incredibly powerful prison gangs tells us something really important. It's not just a security failure. It's a sign that the state's authority has completely broken down. And in that power vacuum, a more primitive, a more brutal form of government, based on pure violence, takes over.
Now, from the chaos of a gang-run prison, we need to turn to one of the state's most extreme tools of control: isolation. What actually happens to a human being when they are completely cut off from the rest of the world?
The United Nations actually gives us a very clear definition here. Solitary confinement isn't just about being alone, it is near total isolation. We're talking 22 or more hours a day without any meaningful human contact. That's the clinical term anyway. The reality is something else entirely.
To really understand this, let's look at the story of John J. Powers. He went into the prison system with no history of mental illness, but after he testified against the Aryan Brotherhood, he was put in solitary, supposedly for his own protection. Later, after a desperate escape attempt driven by fear, he was sentenced to 60 months in isolation. The result? A complete psychotic breakdown. He committed horrific acts of self-mutilation, all of which were a direct result of the psychological torture of being so utterly alone.
And as human rights investigator Brett Grote says, this isn't some unfortunate side effect. The outcome is the purpose. These units create madness, he says. They're designed to break people. They don't just contain individuals, they are engineered to psychologically dismantle them.
And you have to understand, the story of John J. Powers isn't an anomaly. An investigation by Amnesty International into ADX Florence, the U.S. federal supermax prison, found that the average time an inmate spends in these conditions is over 8 years. This isn't a short-term solution, it is a long-term state of being.
This reality brings us to a really difficult system check. If a system is designed in a way that predictably and consistently causes severe mental breakdowns, can we honestly still call it punishment? Or has it crossed a line into something else, something far more disturbing?
And all of this leads us to our final act. How do these realities we've documented stack up against the global standards our societies claim to believe in? Ultimately, this all comes down to a question of human dignity. You see, the international community has laid out a clear standard. The UN's rules for the treatment of prisoners, known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, set the baseline. They demand that all prisoners be treated with inherent dignity. They prohibit torture. They mandate safety, security, and proper health care. And they are explicit that solitary confinement can only be a measure of last resort, and it can never be prolonged or indefinite.
The ideal is right there, in black and white. But the reality we've explored today is so often its complete opposite. So we have to end with this. When the punishment for a crime is not just the loss of freedom, but the systematic stripping away of a person's humanity, what is the true purpose of a system like that?